Dr. Kim, so good to have you. Thank you for joining us. In the pre-interview session, we had some deep and fascinating conversations, and one of them was Burning Man, and we were talking about the principles. And I know that for some context, Dr. Kim has not been to Burning Man before, and you mentioned that radical self-expression really resonated with you as one of the principles from Burning Man. And I am not surprised to hear that, because I see you as someone who, especially in your recent past, have been an embodiment of radical self-expression. Can you share with us how that has played a role for you in the last year? You being a Oxford-educated physician, renowned globally, who has made a dramatic shift in your life path, we'll call it. How has radical self-expression played a role for you through all of this?
What an amazing question. In addition to the radical self-expression, I would like just also to situate it in the context, because in sharing all the principles of Burning Man, one of the things that I received is that radical self-expression is not just letting it all hang out. Radical self-expression in the other components is to be seen, engaged in, experienced with respect for the recipient, both in one's delivery and in one's receiving. And that is also embraced by radical inclusion, total inclusion. In that kind of container, the context of radical self-expression for me has even greater meaning and potential. Your question provoked in me actually a revivification of my entire life, and realizing that one of the components of the trajectory of human life, of each one of us, of each individual life, is to find a way to be able to express themselves radically. And what do we mean by radically? Do I politically radically far from on one side or another side, or from one perspective, or what is the word radical? Well, radical links to root, which is right down deep, but also the willingness and the courage to express, even in a situation where that may cause profound reaction, let's say. So my sense of my whole life is that I have sought to find my voice in a culture and an environment that is programmed and constrained. Necessarily. You have, Mitra has. So to bring that just fast forward into the last year, and I know what you're referring to is my decision to relinquish my license to practice, which was a decision made for me as a human being, as a person, to be able more authentically and honestly to express who I am, myself, my thoughts, my views, the things that work and don't work in my own life without the constraint of a professional persona that also has medico-legal consequences, and increasingly is constrained, in my perception, by a paradigm that is so old, so dead, so unable to open to and contain a renaissance that actually takes us beyond even where we've been. And that was liberating. It took me 5 years to get there in myself, to be able to take that persona off, because that persona had a way of living in this world. And that felt very naked. It was and is evidence of my own commitment to myself and to God. I could no longer, in all conscience, continue in the way that I had been before. And that touched every single area of my life.
Thank you for sharing that. I certainly can relate on a number of fronts with what you've shared. And I know this, but for our audience and for Mitra, can you share what was the driving force for the shift?
This path began when I came into this world. But there was a very distinct moment when I was 18 years old, and I was destined to go and study agricultural sciences and forestry, I received instruction, inner instruction, that if I was to fulfill my reason for being here and be able to answer and to work with, embody the questions that I had at the time, which is what is the meaning of life and how does it work? I had to go to do medicine, and I did not want to do medicine. But such was the power of that moment, and it was a moment. There was Kim before that moment and Kim after that moment. It was so powerful that I turned my horse around. I was working on a ranch at the time, and I was on my way back to the UK the following day. And here we are now, fast forward in a way. But that was the driver. I didn't do it because I wanted to be a doctor in the sense of a medical doctor. If we think about doctoring as being a form of healing, teaching, and leading people into, then yes, of course it was that all the way through. But the question that drove it is, what are human beings? Why do they go through what they go through? What is the meaning of it all? Especially the unbelievable suffering that they cause to each other, seemingly on a cyclical basis. And how does it work? And I now understand the wisdom of that instruction, at least some of it. I feel like I'm at the very beginning of my life, and many of my colleagues are retiring. And I recognize that the 48 years since that moment have been an absolutely amazing training ground. The question, what is the meaning of life? It's as old as the hills, it's as old as humanity. Wherever humanity comes from, whatever its origin is, we can try platitudes like love. It's true, it is. But what does that really mean? And there's the word. And I found increasingly, day by day, like drip by drip into a crucible, that the power, the beauty, the insane complexity, intricacy, and stunning beauty of meaning, of this creation, this matrix, because it actually defines every single thing that we see in creation.
Do you mean the whole matrix or the physical form matrix?
The whole matrix. Because we can go into asking ourselves, where does the whole matrix exist anyway, if not inside ourselves? That's interesting. But to tie it is that what became totally clear to me is that meaning, can I use the word, is an algorithm in a sense, because it is its own safeguard, it is its own power, it has its own laws, forms, equations, that is totally self-protective, because its ultimate goal is to enable us to return to source. And when that happens, we have infinite power. So it's bound to be completely protected.
There's the true meaning, the true essence, versus the meaning that our minds gives things. But what I hear you saying is that the true meaning is never lost, and we're ultimately led to the true meaning and essence of things and of life. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes-ish. That's like a stepping stone. That's
Yes.
like the distinction between forgiveness and unconditional love. I question what each of us means by true meaning, because my own experience over decades now, and relatively recent, the last 4 or 5 years, is that the true meaning is no meaning. And it's the end of the book of Job. He doesn't have anything to say.
The beautiful paradox of life.
Yeah.
I like that, Dr. Kim. I distinguish between reality and truth. Reality is my version of the truth, and truth is the truth, and it's just one. And we all have our own version of that. So I got the moment that you got the message. And now, so many decades later, you obviously got another message that you have become a doctor, and the experiences are still there, but somehow that formal aspect of you being a physician has come to an end, and hence you gave up your license to practice, as you put it. So what was the second message that somehow, I don't know if you've overridden but that somehow went to a different place?
There wasn't actually a second message, Mitra.
Mm.
It was the same message. It was the same source speaking and saying, it's time for this to change. Not because it's time for this to change, just change your shirt. It was because the next iteration of this expression needs a different environment. Because that first message, Damascus experience, was God, source, expressing itself in me as an expression of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not special. I think a lot of people have these experiences. The question is, to what extent do we listen, and do we even understand? Does our education facilitate that? I think the beauty of it is that it, source, universe, source, God, whatever word form we're going to use, it gave rise to its expression through us, through this life form that we're in, planet. And we, as a result of the way in which we are made, as a result of the way in which creation had to happen, where the one had to split, forget that. We forget that we are created. And that, for me, is the hope for humanity.
That we're created. And what comes to me is that we are creators also.
We are.
I have so many questions, but because what you're saying pertains to the invisible world, and I would love to bring it to the visible world, more tangible world. I want to know, between the second delivery of the message and first and the second one, is there anything that you fear or you feared between the first point when you got the message you need to become a doctor, and the second stage of the same message, as you put it, that you need to have a new environment? Did you fear anything? Was there fear involved?
Oh my God, yes. First thing that I realized listening to your question was that message was not, you need to become a doctor. That message was, you must study medicine. And that is an important distinction. And I actually haven't really clocked that.
Wow, what a distinction.
It's hard to separate the two. Studying medicine it's a big commitment.
But also because if we live in a physical world, study medicine is not sufficient for us. Oh, I got to have an office and a doctor and practice and see patients. Yeah.
I'm so grateful for that, because the trap was becoming the doctor in the ordinary sense of the word, because it carries with it meaning, and meaning in the minds of different people in different sectors of society. It's profound. I knew right from the very beginning that the paradigm that we had been developing, following, creating of a more mechanistic worldview through orthodox biomedical science was insufficient to address all that a human being is. And that also embraced the question about what is illness, what is disease, and what is healing, what is health, what is wellness. Because it just did not make sense to me that life that had been in evolution for a long period of time, wherever and however we came to exist as human beings, would have any process that would not ultimately enhance itself, that would not ultimately help it along, because it was primary. It gave rise to us, not the other way around. We came from something. We are part of something. That something lives inside us. So that was my deep driving question, right up until the point which I know I've shared with Ben, that I found myself invited to participate in a small event in Dharamsala by the Dalai Lama, which was supposed to be addressing global health and mental peace for mankind. I was 33 years old at the time. My life was shambolic. I was working hard. I was part of an Oxford team. I was growing something, doing stuff. I'd done some research that had made the global stage. But who the heck was I to address a question like that? And it was in exploring that And there I had fear. You asked me if I had fear. Who the heck was I to be there at that time to address that problem? What did I have that was of value? And it was there that I received disease as a manifestation of health. In myself, trying to prepare something to say. And that was another one of those moments which changed everything. It was like a catalyst in an alchemical reaction. Everything got reorganized. And that's been with me ever since. I have found that when I am true to radical self-expression, that I experience and face fear differently. I felt almost paralyzing fear in my first undergraduate medical examinations because I just didn't feel I knew enough. And how could I ever know enough? I felt fear when I first started to study other forms of medicine at a time when that was not allowed.
You mean alternative?
Yeah, at that time they were called, it was fringe medicine.
Yes.
And then it became alternative, and then it became complementary, and then it became complementary and alternative, and now we have integrative. And my hope, and when I was asked to be the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Alternative and Complementary Medicine, I asked them then, right at the beginning, please can we call this the Journal of Integrative Medicine? Because there's only one medicine. Or I was quite happy if we simply called it the Journal of Medicine and we dedicated ourselves to exploring certain areas of it. It was totally clear that the paradigm of orthodox biomedical medicine and science was insufficient, was inadequate. It could only go so far. I certainly experienced fear in expressing those views. When I first started to talk about disease as a manifestation of health, it was before Deepak did. It was before Wayne had done that. And the kickback was huge. That happened in many different areas. And I have been, yes, afraid, very definitely afraid of radical self-expression in the context that we set it at the beginning, in my career, in my personal life, in my spiritual life, definitely, in my emotional life, and in my intellectual life. That I will, what is my fear these days? My fear, there is a line comes to me just now at the end of Kipling's If you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, and so hold on when there is nothing left within you, save the will that says hold on. I know what it is to have let go because it was too painful. And I know what it is to have filled the unforgiving minute. And I suppose if there's fear, it's not so much fear now. It's of not fulfilling that minute. Because to fulfill that minute requires all of one's being, all of one's energy, all of one's will, as you were experiencing recently too, to express oneself radically, as Giordano Bruno did, and burn for it. But I don't think burning for it as an act of heroism has any value at all, relative to having the wisdom to know what is required in any given moment in order to be able to serve, to continue to serve more consciously. I could also say to you, like many others, at the beginning of the COVID season in 2020, it was totally clear from the outset that this was something that had been planned. And it didn't make sense. Epidemiologically, it simply didn't make sense. And the way in which its proposed solution was forced on people didn't make sense. It simply was not aligned with the profession that I had trained for and entered into. And I knew for myself that there was nothing that would induce me to take something that was untested, especially with the technology that we knew was already involved. There are more and more people who know that now. And yes, there'll be plenty of people who may take issue with what I'm saying, but each of us has a God-given right to believe, research, and express, but not to impose in the way that was happening. All of that is a preamble to saying that if I were to fear anything right now, it would be that I would have to submit to that all over again in another form. Now, I say if I were to fear, I really feel different these days in relation to fear. It's more concern. I know there is no death. The body dies. But I've been alongside enough people dying to know life does not end at death. And we can look at that in a number of different ways. Ultimately, there's nothing that anybody can do to me as an organism that can destroy that part of me that is eternal. Having said that, I have questioned that in relation to the technologies that are now being deployed. And I, like many others, are also exploring that and seeking to understand it better so that we can support people in that journey more effectively and more lovingly.
Thanks for sharing that, Kim. Fear has been very top of mind for me recently as I've been unraveling, really wondering what is the fear. For me, it seems like there's some fear of knowing who I really am, my true essence, perhaps my greatness, perhaps the full power that's within me. I don't know. Have you experienced anything like that?
God, yes. A very dear friend of mine and hugely respected wrote to me not so long ago to say, the only thing that's left is the fear of your greatness, which provoked conversation and exploration and the observation that pretty much every human, and for me, the exploration continues to what does that really mean? What is my greatness? What am I afraid of? And why is it in that case that every human is? It brings us back to meaning, or it allows us to reintroduce it, because whilst the ultimate purpose of meaning is no meaning, what is our greatness, our true greatness? Our true greatness is that we are it. And it's not surprising that I'm afraid of that then. Because what is it that is afraid? Only the ego can be afraid. When I'm in my heart, there's no fear.
Really, fear is going home and being whole again and being great again.
Is it fear that is that, or is it fear that can lead us there, can help us to return?
Either way, I think either works, right?
Yeah.
It can go both ways.
So doesn't that mean that we're attached to our smallness of earthly life?
I can share something with you, very recent. One part of it, as I will share, is very recent. It comes on the back of very much was exploring this question. The fear of letting go, for me, it was not so much the fear of letting go. It was the certainty that I had in my ego self that it had to die, that it was subordinate to something else, and that it had to surrender. And part of that fear was that would lead to eradication in some way. And the recent part is somebody that is really privileged to work with, who had really embodies in his journey to healing radical self-expression to the very best of his ability and within a Jewish community. And in the moment of his own realization, he was actually able to say, I'm really afraid my ego has to die and then there's nothing. Then who am I? And what actually we experience, as I believe you have, Ben, what we begin to be able to practice is dying, because in the dying, a space is opened for a different iteration of ego to come up that can serve better.
Ultimately, we are one with the Creator. And one with the Creator means that we are all of it, and that we are whole, that we are fulfilled, that we are ever new joy, we are ever new bliss, we are peace and unconditional love. And yet we're here in these physical forms. And the spiritual point of view is that we're here because we still have attachment to things in this physical reality. There's still things for us to work out. I'm curious to hear from both of you. Mitra, you first. What are you attached to in this physical world right now?
I'm attached to the aspect of me that I think I need or should be. And when I let that go, it expands to a degree that the attachment dissolves. So it's just like what Dr. Kim was saying. There are two messages here. Your story, Dr. Kim, is just a perfect metaphor. One is study medicine. That's a higher consciousness saying that message. One is become a doctor. That's the different aspects. So when I am attached to become a doctor, fear comes. Because now I want to be the best doctor. I want to be like this doctor. I want to be that doctor. But when I go to study medicine, which in my case is I'm just a teacher and a student, and have been since any memory of this or any other lifetimes allows me to go there. So that is very liberating. What is not liberating and limiting is now I've got to be this teacher and I've got to be that. I got to do this. So that's what attachment I feel. And the moment I become aware of that, I go to liberation. So it's almost like a dance. I'm moving in and out of attachment and liberation. But I understand the contraction comes when I'm attached to exactly what Dr. Kim was saying, the doctor.
So for you,
teacher.
that's the mindfulness teacher, Mitra, the mindfulness teacher, coach.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, educator. Yes, that's
Educator.
it. That's the attachment. But when I let that go, I learn and I become the student and the teacher at the same time because we're always teaching and learning. I don't need to come with a mandate. Like right now is a perfect example. We came to interview Dr. Kim. But here it is, you are asking me and I'm being interviewed, actually not interviewed, interviewed. You are viewing my inner. So there you go. You let it go and it happens when it's a need for it. So that's my attachment to that character called the teacher. Would love to hear yours, Dr. Kim.
Wow, that's really helpful and interesting because you allow me to reintroduce again meaning. My attachment is to a form of identity. My attachment is to form, sensation. My attachment are to ideas that are familiar and I can understand. My attachment is to power. Here we talk about getting out of our comfort zone, that we can only grow when we are willing. Growth only happens at that border between our comfort and discomfort, where we're stretched. But the reason I was particularly struck to become a doctor is very different to being attached to the identity or persona of a doctor in a particular environment, perceived in a particular way and acting in a particular way, because a doctor is actually a being. We study medicine to become a doctor, or we study, that can be traditional Chinese medicine, that can be homeopathic, that can be herbal, that can be any chiropractic. But a doctor is one who has passed through a series of hoops and tests that have been devised by those that are considered to be wiser and more experienced, that in a true living mystery school would then confer that passage through that rite of passage, which was then only the beginning. In traditional Chinese medicine, that took over 20 years. We used to kick and scream at 7 years in orthodox biomolecular medicine, and now that's just being contracted and contracted. But the key to what I'm saying is that I can become attached to the persona, the idea, a particular meaning, which can constrain it in a certain way, and I can continue to question, what does it mean to be a doctor? One who can, with radical self-expression, honesty, authenticity, occupy a way of being and doing in relation to other people. Then I become the embodiment of the medicine that I am studying. And the medicine that I am studying is because there is a genuine interest in what is the meaning of life. Because if I don't have any sense of the meaning of life, what the hell am I doing treating people? What for? And that's when it starts to get really interesting. And we begin to see that there is no pharmaceutical that comes close to the power of meaning.
Can you give an example?
Yeah, there's one woman particularly springs to mind who came to me initially, several years ago now, and weather conditions meant that we weren't able to meet in a physical clinic in London, and we had to meet online. This is before Zoom. And she had come to me with a hematological malignancy and a diagnosis, and she had been ostensibly being given 6 months, maybe 9 months. And when we spoke and I listened, I found myself, in spite of myself, but through my commitment, my listening, and my radical self-expression, saying to her, I think it's very simple. You haven't decided whether you want to stay. And she said, what do you mean? And I said, you haven't decided whether you want to stay or whether you want to go. And it's okay, either way. Mm. And I remember hearing my voice at the time and thinking, wow, you never even met this woman. She lived at least 10 years, I think longer, and went on to express herself radically, because that was what it actually was all about.
Wow. Which goes, by the way, Mitra, to your earlier comment about no more dual citizenship.
Yeah.
Just pick a path, commit to it. So often we're indecisive about things, but subconsciously. Yeah. This is so fascinating because, and I experienced this recently, by the way, so I really resonate with what you're saying. I became starkly aware that I was deciding to subscribe to a certain set of beliefs that was creating inner suffering for me. It was my choice. I just had to make a choice.
Yes.
And I fortunately had something to hold up a mirror to me, someone, and I was able to see that. And I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
But we're unaware of it. How do we make ourselves aware?
I'm sorry, I have to explain what you meant because the listeners were not involved when I spoke about citizenship. So let me just clarify that and then we continue. I was sharing with Dr. Kim and Ben that I write sometimes freely early in the morning, and I write beyond my knowledge. And I was writing about a message a few years ago about the fact that I think we're getting to a time and a place as our collective human being experience that we need to choose our citizenship. And I don't mean the country as opposed to energetic citizenship. Am I for basically love or am I for fear? Am I for interconnectedness or am I for separation? And I think that time has definitely come to an absolute fruition right now. And I can feel it, that all the cover-ups are being removed, as Dr. Kim said, and they're going to be even more removed. And so we will be standing there naked in our truth, having to make a choice. But the choice is always there. And that is the citizenship that Ben is referring to.
Thank you, Mitra.
Ben, your question is, how do we make ourselves aware of our dual citizenship?
Yeah. So often as individuals, we are the creators of our life, right? Mm-hmm. We don't realize it, but there's something in our life that's creating suffering for us. And the reality is that we are choosing that for ourselves. But most of the time we are blind to that. So how can we make ourselves more aware of that? Do you have any insights on that?
Yes. And that is to understand that disease is a manifestation of health. Suffering is a manifestation of health. Suffering is your feedback that it's time for your growth, that you're alive. Now, you can become addicted to suffering, which is not healthy, and you can receive the messages of your suffering and work with them, listen to them, go into them, which you do, and you do to a degree that is exceptional. But that is a completely different worldview. I've thought for a long time, and I feel that it will become a very significant part of life, certainly my life in the future. It's very much part of my inner life now, but its manifestation, I don't know its form. But imagine if as a 5-year-old, not only were you taught that a hammer bashes a nail in, or you can do something with it, or you're being taught to use ChatGPT or God knows what else, but if you were really taught that meanings matter, that meaning is what determines and gives rise to the manifestation of all life, that words have meaning, that words are spells. We learn to spell, don't we? And when we are very first engaging in this world of exchange and discourse, which actually starts right at the very beginning, I have no doubt that it would radically transform the way in which we live.
And we'd be having to give up the benefit that we're getting from the suffering. Because let's face it, the reality is the ego, we'll call it the ego self, is somehow indulging in the suffering, whether that be guilt, shame, suffering, anger. There is some sort of benefit that the ego is getting. So how does that play a part in this, right? So that we have a choice. Okay, I know I can change the meaning. Now I have to be willing to let go of that thing, that benefit, quote unquote, that my ego is addicted to.
And that's life. That's how it's designed. Okay. The beautiful pip from the apple is gorgeous, shiny brown, but it knows somewhere, let's just say, there's an analogy, there's a tree in me. There's a tree that bears fruit in me. Oh my God, I'm going to have to split open and die. And then I'm going to have to brave putting down a root and coming out.
So it's really about seeing what are we giving up.
The thing is, I'm going to give up my known familiar fear and suffering and disease for an unknown potential pleasure, growth, liberation. This is known and that is unknown. This is familiar, that is unfamiliar. That's a family I don't know. This is the family I know. So
there's another part to it, Mitra. In truth, we have no fear of the unknown. We live in the unknown all the time.
yes,
You don't know what's going to come in the next millisecond.
true.
When we say we have fear of the unknown, we are projecting something forwards. We are projecting unfamiliar. And that is unique to each one of us. What is it that I'm projecting into the unknown that makes me afraid? That has its root. And there's some useful work to be done, to be looked at, to be seen, to be balanced out, and then it will dissolve. And we're in the now again. But Ben, I think there is a danger in over-intellectualizing and psychotherapizing the addiction, the attachment, and the strategy. They're important, don't get me wrong. But sometimes the feedback, the sensation, the suffering, which means to undergo, to go through, is quite simply because it needs to be felt, because that has a biochemical, biophysical, physiological impact on the organism as a whole that can change perception and then allow something else in. And sometimes what it allows in is nothing short of miraculous that we could never even have dreamt of.
Absolutely. And I think there's a difference between allowing us to feel through, let's say, the emotion of guilt and seeing what it holds for us versus being in a loop.
I ask you, Ben, in that context, both of you, do you mean, Ben, that it was guilt? Or is it that you, in being with that, were given to experience remorse?
Yes, absolutely. And my mind was holding it as guilt. So my mind was holding it as guilt, and really actually what I felt was deep grief. So some context, this was in relation to my relationship with my mother. I realized that as a child, I had decided to close my heart to my mother. And actually in my mind, I felt I had labeled it as guilt, like I am bad for doing this. But what I realized when I allowed myself to see what's really there is there was deep remorse and grief about that. And when I felt that fully, energetic opening, and two, just a paradigm shift in terms of my relationship with my mother.
I love that distinction because remorse gives me power to do something different. Guilt just paralyzes me. There's nothing I can do.
Guilt is imagination.
True, but also the energy of it completely stops me from moving forward. But remorse says, okay, so that didn't work. It's just, to me, I call it spiritual whoopsing. It's just, whoops, that didn't work. It's just simple as that. When I get to that light place, sometimes, it's just as simple as that. It's, whoops, didn't work. Oops, drop this. Oops, that broke. Whoops. And then that allows me to move forward. Now I know that doesn't work. Now I know I want to do it differently. I want to show up differently. I want to interact differently. I want to be my being different way. And maybe it's just that citizenship. Maybe I want to be more of a love energy than the fear energy. But it can be that light, whereas guilt is extremely dense.
Oh,
It's just,
God.
I can't move it, and I can't move because of it. And it's a stuck energy that it doesn't serve, at least doesn't serve me.
I'm very grateful to both of you for what you've shared, because you've opened something. You've opened a space in which something could emerge. And it leads to something which I want to say, Mitra, in relation to citizenship. But the first thing is that guilt, I experience guilt, or it seems, when I have done something that is somehow a set of values from the outside. I feel remorse when I realize that when it's my responsibility, that I chose, normally I feel guilt when I choose to do something that I know, when I have not been radically self-expressing honestly. So I might steal some money, or, when I was a kid and I felt guilty. I felt remorse when I thought, why didn't I ask my parents for some money? Remorse it has a different energy, a different frequency, and it has its center of, its axis of responsibility in me. But in relation to the citizenship, I've been struggling, to be honest, with the notion that there is a citizenship of love and a citizenship of fear. What came to me as you were saying that, and this is personal, is that there is a citizenship of a way of living and being that acknowledges source as primary, as alpha and omega, that I am part of, that is me, I am it, in this world, in a journey of evolution of consciousness that is already complete, but nevertheless, here we are. And there is another citizenship of a world that does not acknowledge that thinks it is primary. Humanity thinks it can dominate, that thinks it can control nature, that thinks it can control humans, that is hierarchical in a way that is mechanical and suppressive. And that is a choice, very definitely. And I knew there have been moments along my own career, for example, you ask about fear, where the expedient would have been not to acknowledge that there is a mystery. And that mystery is more powerful than anything else, that healing can happen, and healing can be radical. Healing can be miraculous. It does happen. Don't pretend that it doesn't. And that requires that honesty. And yes, there can be fear at those moments.
Yeah.
And Ben, I wanted to say, I can identify 100% with what you shared. As a child, one does not close off one's heart without reason. I guarantee, I'm saying it this way, but if I could put it a different way, there was pain, was there not?
Absolutely.
Intense pain. Because as that child, you knew already that it wasn't safe. In my own experience, there was then the added pain of realizing that I was playing the same game as them. So closing my heart and my radical self-expression as a child was a strategy, a survival strategy under certain circumstances. But I also knew, and that this was something that came out of recent, very deep and personal experience, that child already knew that it was then engaging in the very thing that it most disliked and that caused the most pain. And the paradigm shift that comes with it is the recognition that the pedestal on which we have held them, even though we closed our hearts, was not appropriate.
As a mother, a voice for the mothers, and a person who knows Ben's mother, I first of all wanted to say that I experienced her as a very loving person and a very loving mother. But like the rest of us, we do not come with training and manual. We do not have very good role models, with all due respect to parents. And in general, energetically speaking, in my view, and this is just a personal view, we have an issue with the being that turned us from being an energetic being into matter, mother, matter. So that's where, to me, where the mother comes from. So there is a little bit of a thing against that person that turned my liberated self into this thing called Mitra. And we need to consider that. And there's, of course, memories of, as Dr. Kim said, the fact that they came with their own shortcomings. And when I was a child, I saw them as the ultimate powers to be. So I made them big. I wanted to be here, but I see them responsible, especially the mother. And then, of course, they fail in many ways, as we all do. So the combination of all of this makes this relationship one of the most fundamental and one of the most charged relationships of our life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's becoming more and more clear to me just how profound. My mom is my greatest teacher.
Yes.
My mother is my greatest teacher in my life. And it's incredible. As I've gone through this process of letting go of the anger, letting go of the guilt, allowing myself to feel the remorse, right? It's become clear to me just this woman, how much she's done for me, how much she actually sacrificed to raise me. And my mother went through a lot. And how I never fully acknowledged her for that. And actually, I mentioned to you guys that after this recording, I have a meeting with her, and a part of that meeting is going to be to acknowledge her and to celebrate her and to thank her for everything she's done for me and to apologize. Because while the child self didn't know any better, and I have deep compassion for my child self, my adult self has chosen to perpetuate something that didn't need to. And for that, I had a choice. I've had a choice. And for that, I'm deeply apologetic to my mother, and I plan on expressing that to her.
Can I share something in relation to that? Who would you be if you had not behaved the way you did? Is there anything actually? Let me put the question, who would you be is one half of the question. Who would she be if you hadn't expressed yourself that way?
Who would she be if I hadn't expressed? She would be different. And I would say that it's all perfect, right? It's all happening the way it's needed to happen. It's served us along the way.
And I suspect if we just hold very still and honor that first, and I'm really grateful because we have shared meaningful experience together. But let's just take her now and imagine her without having gone through the obstacle race that it was to be your mother. And the reason that I asked the question, Ben, is very simple and it's very personal. When you said apologize, something in me winced.
Yeah.
Perhaps there's something I don't know, but I am responding with radical self-expression, honoring the recipient with what my body experienced when you said it. Maybe there's something to celebrate.
There is, absolutely. I think it's interesting because the apology is something that I've been guided to do, and it's not from a place of guilt because I've contemplated this. I've been contemplating this. I think I've been guided, and the guidance that has come to me is that the apology is going to have a healing effect for her. And the truth is that I have done things. We were partners in a business together. We've gone through some difficult times. I've said some mean things to her. I've gotten very angry at her, and I've felt things towards her that I think have hurt her. And I take responsibility for that, not from a place of guilt, just take responsibility for it. And I want to acknowledge that. And I think it would be healing and meaningful to her to hear that from me.
Yeah. I think to me, apology could also mean expression of a deeper desire that I wish I'd known earlier. That's all. It's just that awareness that you have right now. I would translate it like that in my life, but also then I would answer myself, had you known better, you wouldn't be here. So I think here there's a dual citizenship duality of holding one's actions in a way that I'm responsible, but also understanding the bigger picture. So there's a small and a bigger picture. Smaller picture requires apology and helps a lot of people to hear the apology.
It's the three-dimensional. The apology is like the three-dimensional.
Yeah.
And the bigger picture is ultimately, it's all
good.
It's all the happening and unraveling the way is meant to.
Exactly.
Me behaving the way that I did was a gift for her, and her behaving the way she did towards me was a blessing and a gift for me.
And you had agreements to exchange these things for the purpose of both of your growth and the growth of humanity. As people, I'm sure, listening to this conversation, they will make their own conclusions and adjustments and understanding of their own lives. So it's always working in a perfect way.
You've both said very important things, which introduce again this magic, the magic of meaning and the miracles that it gives rise to. So you can say, Ben, ultimately we all know it's perfect. That's a powerful statement. And that has meaning. And what do we mean by it's all perfect? And I'm not saying that facetiously or lightly, because there's no doubt that perfection has meaning for you, for Mitra, for me. So in honor of radical self-expression, honoring recipient and giver, which is where you're going to be, which is where we are right now. And I say again, I resonate with what you are saying personally and very deeply. The only person who has responsibility for what I feel is me. So when I say, or I feel, and I share this with you in my own situation with my own mother, there will be healing in this for her. Where does that come from? Is that actually a safer way of saying there will be healing for me if I can show up in a different way and take responsibility for that which I knew at the time? I personally went through a particular situation in my early 20s that was connected with the spiritual community into which I was born that had a shattering impact on my life at the time. I was 24. We had addressed it and have addressed it many times, my parents and I. Every single time I experienced a shutting down, a refusal, and my experience of that had been an abrogation of a certain kind of responsibility in them that I hoped for from them. 42 years later, in readdressing that situation, I perceived its gift for me. It took 42 years to cook. It took 42 years for that apple seed to become an apple tree and to be able to bear fruit. It took 42 years. And in that moment, it was instantaneous. I felt nothing but unconditional love. I just was like, oh my God, the perfection. So here comes that word, the multidimensionality, the minute intricacy of everything over 42 years to come to that moment, the gratitude. And that's not to negate the suffering in between. There are plenty. But you're opening us to the possibility of a level of honesty if we choose it. If we choose it, that's citizenship for me. And we all have that possibility. All of us. And I'm absolutely certain, 100% certain that there isn't a single person listening, sharing with us this inquiry who does not have in their lives something of that nature. May not be with a mother, maybe with It doesn't matter who it's with.
And Kim, this is part of your work,
Yeah.
helping people come to these revelations. Can you talk about that with us? Tell us about Telos. Telos is a fascinating process. Just in a
nutshell.
In a nutshell,
Okay.
what is Telos, and how are you helping people with
Telos
Telos?
is the ultimate meaning, purpose, vision, mission of a human life. It comes from the Greek, and which means the end in mind, the ultimate purpose of something. We could say that the ultimate purpose of an acorn is the oak tree and other acorns. We could say that it's the beautiful oak chair that you might be sitting on, and it might be the beautiful oak table that's in Mitra's dining room. Who knows? But in the human, it has a very particular function. So if I take you back to that moment sitting on a rooftop in Dharamsala before the seminar that we were to give, it became clear to me in Disease is a Manifestation of Health. The disease is a manifestation of health because all life is leading to something, and that all life is leading to something in each individual individually, and it's unique to them. And the beauty of it for me at that time, at that stage in my development, in my study of medicine, science, research, was that it didn't matter if I had 5 different heart attacks for example, in acute receiving that night, or 5 different asthmas, or whatever it might be. There was now an awakening to the fact that each one of them was going through that particular journey, those symptoms, that for a reason that was unique to them. And that's how it was for years. I started writing Diseases of Meaning in 1991. We published it in 1999. That paper encapsulates this work, and that is that there is a reason. It's not an intellectual reason, and we can explore it and take more time to explore it in another situation. The Telos is the embodiment of what that is for each individual. It, for Steve Jobs, was the creation of Apple and an international, multinational, global phenomenon. For somebody else, it might be bearing of 3 children living in a tiny little place in a village somewhere, and that is their mission. That is their raison d'etre. That is what, and their whole life, we have no idea what that life gives rise to and how it impacts the whole. But what emerged, it was a discovery for me, Kim, human, animal self, but it was a reawakening to the fact that when the majority of people don't know what it is for them, and when they find it, when they can give voice to it, it changes everything. So the majority don't know, but the majority also know that there is something. If I would have a woman who came with breast cancer or whatever, and I'd sit on the side of her bed and say to her, why do you think you've got this now? Almost invariably, there's a sigh of relief that somebody's asked the question and that they've got the time. They want to listen. They want to hear. Nothing was ever the same after Auntie Joe's doggy died, or whatever it might be, because that doggy had a particular meaning for them, and that led to particular things that happened that create. And so the story starts to tell itself, and the moment it starts to tell itself, everything changes.
Yeah, nothing is random or arbitrary.
No. And so what emerged was a way of being able to take people into a journey that would enable it to reveal itself to them.
So do they need to have an illness in order for the process to be effective?
No, absolutely not. What is required for it is a deep, abiding, genuine intention, radically to self-express and find out, to surrender, and to be willing to die.
You make that easier. I haven't done the Telos, but I've experienced the power of your inquiry and holding space, and it's like nothing I've ever experienced before from someone else. It's a gift that you have. It's an incredible gift.
How does one experience it? Telos with you.
Me? Or you're talking to Kim or?
No, I'm asking Dr. Kim, if I'm listening to this, I say I would like to experience that.
I want that.
How do I go about that?
So there are a number of ways, Mitra, and thank you for asking. I like most of all to do it in person. It's a wonderful thing to do in person, either one-to-one or as a group. And that I have done. Convid opened up the whole world of online work. And a very dear friend of mine in Australia if she ever hears this, she'll know exactly who she is, just said to me, "Come on, Kim, let's just do it online." And she and I had done it together, one-to-one. And her life touches the lives of literally millions, if not billions of people already. Doing it online is an interesting thing to do. It works. It absolutely works. It needs 2-3 hours of time, really, ideally. Some of my friends and colleagues have said it's too long. You don't need to do it that long. We can do it, knock it off in 15 minutes or half an hour. And you can, and you absolutely can in a certain way. It's a bit like saying you can do the Beck depression scale.
Yeah.
And you can say, yeah, you're depressed. Or you can say, what does that mean for you? So what I have found in my life, in my work, and this has not been easy, is that the full journey enables circumstances to be created within for this very sacred thing to emerge. And I use the word sacred advisedly because you can't mess with it.
Mm-hmm.
When it emerges, sometimes when it emerges, it stares people stark in the face. They know that what they've been doing is not what they're really here to do, but suddenly it's there. What do I do about it? And I've had clients who've come, we've done a telos together, and then I don't hear from them for 5 years. And then they come back and say, I think I'm ready to face this. And then there are others for whom it is just like, it's like rocket fuel.
Mm-hmm. They're ready for it.
Yeah. This has evolved over time. It was part of my medical practice. I just did it. I just did it quietly because people would become ready for it, because this is my work, my practice is about asking these questions. And to this day, it doesn't matter if you come in having twisted your ankle. I know that's a disease of meaning for you. And it doesn't happen for no reason.
Yeah.
And people can say, I'm stop staring mad. I know that's not the case, because as one goes into it, not forgetting the mechanical causes, not forgetting structure and function, as we go into it, the revelation that something very specific happened at that moment when I twisted my ankle. Oh my God, this is what I was thinking. This is what was happening over here. And actually, this needed to happen. And then when that is seen and owned for what it actually is, it's gone. Sometimes, not always.
Can you identify any characteristics between the people who receive the insight and decide to put it on the shelf and the people who receive it and use it as rocket fuel? Have you noticed any common characteristics?
Yes, absolutely. And it goes all the way back to the beginning. And it's all about meaning. Let's say, for whatever reason this is coming, the telos is like a crystal ball in a number of different ways, because when you are ready, when you do it, I've realized that people need to prepare for it. And I've realized this more and more deeply. So I won't just take somebody into it. They need to be ready inside themselves. And there are criteria for it. The way I refer to it is it's your true north. So you can bring anything to it, any question, any issue, things that are happening in your life. It don't have to be bad, good things. How does it feel? If when you bring it to your telos, which is ultimate mission on this planet, in this incarnation, if it doesn't expand your field, it's not the way to go. If it doesn't increase your energy, if it collapses it, that's its way of communicating, right? Your true north, you're either aligned with it or you're not. It's simple. For those who put it away for a while, even may rubbish it for a bit. Oh God, I could tell you so many stories about that. And the reason that I use the analogy of the crystal ball, I see it now, is that you can look into it and it may show you something, but you may not be ready.
Because a piece of them, they'd have to give up parts of them that they're unwilling to give up. Going back to the earlier part of our conversation, the attachments and the addictions that we have that we may not be willing to let go of.
And the programming, because I wonder if I can give you an example of each. Yes, I'm thinking of somebody who was brought up, conditioned in the Hindu tradition, and his telos revealed beyond all doubt that his path lay in breaking free from that and in forging the path that he'd been called to that would make a difference to millions of people with something relatively simple. And for him, it had already taken 5 decades to get there. That was tough, with implications in every area of his life. For others, so I'm thinking of another one now, also within a tradition, but he's already done a lot of work on that. The emergence of his telos revealed to him the miraculous magic of what it was that he had been guided to create and the reason for it. So at a very difficult time in his life and constrained with very challenging physical symptoms, he could see and feel and know and honor the reason for the constraints that he'd been living under and the physical suffering that he had undergone, because he simply wasn't ready. He simply wasn't able to really take responsibility for what that would mean. And there's one other person I want to bring into this. I love this man. I can't even begin to express how much I love this man and the journey that he has been on, having been brutalized by the medical community with, at the age of 34, a 6-month window. 7, 8 years ago now, who is now touching, transforming, enlivening people's lives in a way that it's just completely and utterly magical, miraculous. And I know that the telos was part of that transformation, and that now what emerged in those very dark times at the very beginning is actually beginning to reveal itself to be not just premonitory, but...
Richard Rudd, who is the transmitter of the gene keys, he says when we have these realizations, these shifts, when we realize our true north, our mission, there's literally a change in our gene expression happens. Our DNA changes. At parts of our DNA that were dormant activate, they awaken.
Yes, it's true. And let me just make it quite clear, this was not with telos alone. That his journey involved many different things, but informed at the beginning with a radical definition. Let's say definition. I was going to say redefinition, but a radical definition of the meaning of his life, that his life had meaning. That first exchange at that particular time was, who are you going to believe? It's up to you. You're completely free. You want to believe that you've got 4 months? Great. Or how about we actually set about living life that this is ultimately meaningful? Is that going to lead us? And what is that going to enable? This little guy who wouldn't say boo to a goose is touching millions of lives every single day. And that has needed the whole entire medical infrastructure and all kinds of other things, but at the heart of which is meaning and his telos. And he didn't have to choose that. And it's key. It's absolutely key. It's absolutely critical. There's no judgment. There's no judgment. There's a choice. There is always choice. Which citizenship are you going to have? Are you going to take the citizenship of ultimate meaning in some way, shape, or form, even though you don't know what that is or you don't know how to articulate it in that moment? Or are you going to say, it's a pile of crock? And who am I going to associate with?
That sounds like an amazing process for people who are ready for it. And there will be information, by the way, for them to contact you, and maybe mutually you can assess if we're ready to move with this process. But on that note, I want to bring this session to an end with a deep gratitude and deep joy for this threesome, this connection that was really fascinating. And I know we can go on. And for some of you, I should just say that we started this conversation long before, and I know this may sound like it went for a long time. I want you to know there was another hour, and we can go for many hours, but it just speaks about the depth of Dr. Kim's experience along with Ben's, and how much it really encourages me to speak out. Thank you. Thank you to you, Dr. Kim, or I would like to call you the medicine man. That's the thing that came to me instead of Dr. Kim. Medicine man Kim. I think that's far more appropriate. And thank you, Ben, for being so transparent in these conversations. And vulnerable. I really am grateful and honored to be a witness to the conversation with two of you.
Thank you, Mitra.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much. Kim, absolute joy, absolute honor, so much love, always.
Likewise to you
Thank
both.
you. Thank you. Kim, your website, where if someone wants to connect with you, how can they do that?
drkimjobst.com is probably the simplest.
Okay, we'll include that in the show notes. We'll also include a link to your paper on diseases meaning.
Of meaning. Yeah, that would be great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Lovely. It's always good to hear from people. So please feel free to be in touch.
Thank you so much for tuning in today. For a list of the links and other resources referenced in this episode, check out the podcast description.
If you're benefiting from our podcast, we'd love if you could help us reach more people by subscribing. Your support means the world to us. From our hearts to yours, we thank you.